So as well as hearing from people around the world, we'll also hear about some of the great initiatives here in Australia. Obviously being here in Melbourne, we see Racing Victoria, Racing New South Wales, Queensland Racing, Racing SA all have different models, all the PRAs. We see something such as, great to see Andrew Brown here from Living Legends. Of course, they have some of the great retired Melbourne Cup winners. In fact, they're about to have Makybe Diva, which is quite unusual, as a mare, a three-time Melbourne Cup winner, and 8 Melbourne Cup winners will be in place for a little while there at Living Legends. So that'll be great for so many people to see what can be done with these beautiful horses, just relaxing and a bit of a tourist destination, Living Legends. And as Di touched on, Chrissy Harris, thoroughbred sport horse in New South Wales, doing a wonderful job. Kick Up is a new organisation in Australia. Great to see Tanita Vella here, who's the chair, and also with Godolphin. Of course, Godolphin Lifetime Care have been great supporters of this conference for many years too, trying to encourage people to understand the actual facts about how many horses are actually being retrained and rehomed, just to sort of fight back against the anti-racing brigade. So some great conversations to be had here today. But first of all, I'll introduce our first keynote speaker of the afternoon. He's someone I've known for a couple of decades in our sports media work in Sydney. Tim Gilbert's gone from radio to TV with a long career at Channel 9 and now with Sky News Australia, where he hosts a thoroughbred racing program on Saturday mornings called Racing Dreams. Please welcome Tim Gilbert.
Look, I feel particularly humbled. Just some of the people I've already spoken to today. Andrew McLean, a scientist himself, of course, who is from the inside of the industry. How cool is that? Amanda Ross at Sydney Olympic Games, just bred a thoroughbred. Can we get a round of applause? A beautiful little foal. Jess Bott, who rode track work this morning and has competed at the highest level in the equestrian world. Yeah, it's just quite humbling to be here. And I also spoke to Kazu Tomoto, who took fourth in the Olympics in Tokyo, and he's here too. So we've got some really elite human beings.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I know, Tim, horses really play a big role in your daily life, particularly through Josie, your wife, of course, as well. But for you too, tell us a bit about that.
Oh, absolutely. Look, so it is Valentine's Day as well, so I do have a message from my wife, and I'll be reading that out later. Now, my wife has worked in equine welfare for a number of years. We live up in the northwest of Sydney. We've got 3 children. We've got 5 horses, plus I've got a few shares and a few race horses, and we have 3 children. But just give you a bit of an insight into our lives. So every time I have a show, I look out the back, and there they are. There's 2 former thoroughbreds, recent thoroughbreds. There's another former racehorse, Putty, who you may know, who's retired, who is a great companion horses for both those 2 thoroughbreds that my wife is retraining into eventers. We also have a warm blood and a pony that she does teaching with young children. So I see it day in, day out. I see the love of those horses. I see the care of those horses. I feel the chagrin when my wife walks down from the stables with a frown, thinking the vet's on their way. So I see from every element. But those horses get treated better than I do, and I'm happy with that. But then I walk to the Magic Millions to go and do some work for our Racing Dreams, and I hear these protesters out the front, and I hear what they're saying, and I hear their message, and I know personally that 99.8% of it's rubbish. But does that matter? Because everyone walking into that racetrack is hearing it.
And obviously in our roles in I guess media, it really is so important to tell the equine sort of, rehoming, retraining, I guess you can call it welfare in this sort of instance. You really need to tell it well, don't you?
You have to. And I think that is, look, if there's one thing I feel like I can't change a light bulb, I know how to talk, and I've worked in the media for a long, long time. So I think when I look at this, and I've come to racing closely through Racing Dreams the past 4 years and worked in many other sports at Channel 9 for 23 years, Olympic Games, lots of rugby league, lots of cricket through the subcontinent. The story of the equine welfare needs to be told so much better. People need to be proud of the whole equine welfare story. And it needs to become part of the mainstream. It needs to be part of dinner parties. When you are sitting at a table, there needs to be someone at that table that is somewhere through the mainstream, whether it be social media, whether they saw it on the TV, on a morning TV show, or whether they read it in the newspaper, they can then give a counter viewpoint to some of the stories that are given out by those, as UK, the anti-racing brigade, and so much of their story is rubbish, but you're not going to convince them.
No.
And they're not the ones you really need to convince. You need to win the hearts and minds of the public, and that's the way to do it. And it's through clever communications programs, both by the young, who I think are the heart and soul of social media, so they know how to get that story out there, and just by having PRAs all around the world being very, very active on getting that story out there, getting a nice little story that will get everyone's attention. I remember once the Waratahs, the rugby team in New South Wales, they have a launch like most sports teams do, and you get press releases, and as you and I know, Caroline, you'll only go to the ones that have got interest. Mm-hmm. So no one really cares about their launches. But one year they did this thing where they went to Martin Place and got all these rubber elephant heads and put it on and broke the world record for rubber elephant heads, and everyone went. So that's the sort of thing. I know I'm going to extremes with my example, but the storytelling needs to be rich, it needs to be potent, but it also needs to grab the heartland's attention.
And it also needs facts and figures as well. I mean, this is when we're talking about the PRAs, or in Australia, the principal racing authorities, the state and the national sort of bodies. It's about actually having numbers to be able to say, look, these are the true numbers, because this is what we're seeing. And this is, as I said, with Kick Up that Vicky Leonard started, and as I said, Tanita is the chair of it. It's about teaching young people about the actual numbers of how many people are actually taking on horses, how many, the ones that really may not be able to have a home. You have to have that discussion as well. But it's the actual figures too, isn't it? That's part of the story.
Oh, absolutely. It needs to be data-driven. Facts needs to be put next to the great storytelling. But for instance, in Racing Dreams, we're about to embark on, I think it's our 14th series next weekend for the autumn. One of the stories that stands out for me in this space was there was a young girl growing up in Western Sydney. I think she was 16 years old, loved horses, and had two horses at the time, and had the most rare lightning strike that struck both those horses. And I met up with her after she'd been gifted a former racehorse through the Equine Welfare Program, and to talk to that young girl and to hear her story in the middle of this paddock, and she was in tears. But the impact that horse, so that whole saying about the inside of a horse can have an amazing impact, or the outside of a horse can have an amazing impact of the inside of the human being, those types of stories, you know what I mean? Along with the data, along with the detail, along with the numbers that you're just mentioning, that's the way to do it.
Well, I mean, you obviously, I remember back in the day I was working at Fox Sports. I think you were doing some work, both of us at 2UE in the day. So we'd have a bit, I mean, I followed racing a long time, but you sort of come to it a bit later. You'd have a bet back in those days. Everyone in that sporting environment did. But you've come to racing a bit later. What are your sort of impressions of it coming, not being brought up in a racing family, not being, a racing journalist right from the outset, coming to it with fresh eyes?
Yeah, well, I'm a half Lebanese boy from Guildford. Obviously too big to ride a horse. But I always sort of loved a little bet here and there. But to be exposed to the industry, and say from 4 years ago, closely with this, this show that I was given, and said, "Oh, can you do this?" And I said, "Well, I know how to do the media side of things. I need to learn quickly. My wife's right into it, but I need to learn quickly." And it's been like a beautiful flower opening up for me, because I think the storytelling in this industry, collectively from wherever you look at it, is just so rich. The history is so rich. The people have got great stories, whether you travel down to Burrawa and speak to John at New Haven Park, or you go up and speak to Tim Boland up on the Central Coast and see what he's doing, and he tells his story about how he broke Winks in. I think that there's no industry quite like racing, and that's what I feel, racing and the whole equine space. It has a story to it that most sports don't even come close to.
And Josie, I know, as you said, your wife, you have a lot of conversation. She worked at Racing New South Wales for a while, and she's an excellent rider and has the rehomed thoroughbreds that she's training, as you said, to event. But she's fully aware of the work being done on thoroughbred rehoming. I mean, what are some of her thoughts? What are some of your discussions about where it really needs to go? Because we do have an issue in Australia that it's a very state-based, run, and obviously the PRA is a government-run. Things have to be done through a certain state. But, an overarching umbrella would be wonderful, but what are your discussions with Josie?
Well, I'm not going to try and risk sort of anecdotally saying what Josie said, so I will read out. She wrote quite a tome here, and as Karen and others will know, and Jess and Caroline, Josie's very passionate. But let me read this because she thought very long and hard about that, and these are her words. Thanks for the opportunity to say a few words. Can I start by posing a few questions? If I'm an industry participant, how do I know my trainer, pre-trainer, spelling farm or breeder have solid welfare credentials? As an owner, can I select a trainer or spelling farm based on their independently verified welfare performance? Could there be a welfare accreditation scheme, like you just mentioned, so participants can work towards complying or exceeding benchmarks? Their welfare rating would demonstrate commitment to best practice and allow like-minded partners to align with them. Those achieving a welfare rating could be published, visible, and used to promote the welfare credentials of the racing industry more broadly. Can we do this without consistency, benchmarks, assessment, and knowledge? A welfare incident involving a horse bred to race is viewed by the public as an incident in horse racing, full stop. They do not differentiate by jurisdiction. Consistency in welfare standards and benchmarks will assist the industry in maintaining a social licence, but more importantly, value the horse equally regardless of where they race, live or retire. How can we say we achieve good welfare outcomes if there's not a standard to measure against? Without assessment and measurement, we can't demonstrate performance or improvement. Meaningful performance data, benchmarking and transparency helps build trust in the industry. What is best practice and emerging in research? If I want to know how best to care for, break in, train my horse for performance and soundness, where do I go? Keeping across best practice is a full-time job and bamboozling if you go down the rabbit hole of seeking solutions or truth on the net. This is true both for those in the industry and those taking on our retired horses. Can the industry be supported by a central knowledge bank, a website curated by experts to support and troubleshoot problems to raise the bar for welfare? Help those taking on retired horses as well as your participants. They need the tools to economically manage such issues as gastric ulcers, problem behaviours, nutrition, musculoskeletal health, hoof health and development, and develop horsemanship skills, all challenges that jeopardise welfare and successful rehoming. A resource like this could fast-track findings from research and put them into practice. Final page. This industry is a great one and we are lucky to have such a wonderful equine partner in the thoroughbred. Let's take some steps towards making it better. Help the little people, those taking on the retired thoroughbreds who are faced with rising feed prices, dwindling access to agistment, and will experience challenges with soundness and behaviour, as all horse owners do. They can't afford a vet or instructor. Support them with the expert advice and the other resource they need, as they will be supporting these animals for the bulk of their life. Finally, put equine welfare front and centre as the first item on management meeting agendas, so it never gets lost when decisions are made. So that's from Josie. She edited it down because she wanted to write more, but as you can see, she's very passionate about the subject.
And we will hear more. Our equestrian panel that's coming up a bit later on, we'll hear a lot more about, what the equestrian world needs, a lot of the issues that Josie's touched on there, to really be able to rehome these horses successfully, because they are different to a lot of the breeds that these, a lot of equestrian people have actually dealt with before. So you mentioned before, just as a final note, the time's flown, being proud. I mean, the racing industry, we need to be proud of these horses and really promote them as the wonderful horses they are, obviously, and be proud of what our racing industry achieves and what it gives back, and really sing the praises of what so many people work so hard to achieve in the industry.
Oh, absolutely. And if you just look at the racing side of things, you look at the Depression, the Great Depression, it happened and it coincided with the rise of the mighty Phar Lap, and how that racehorse rose and took people away from what was happening. I think there was 29% unemployment. Organisations were falling apart. People couldn't put food on the table. Yet when Phar Lap was on, it just took people away. We had Winks, thankfully, in the early part of our Racing Dreams tenure. And one moment, I'll leave you with this little story because it was fantastic and warms your heart to retell it. There was a country trainer who I was great mates with, had a little racehorse with him, and his daughter was absolutely adult daughter, battered by multiple sclerosis. Like, you wouldn't, you couldn't comprehend the life that she'd led of constant seizures and the way that it battered her. But what Winks did to her, the impact that Winks had for those few minutes. She had posters, she had signs, and one morning at Rosehill Gardens, before Winks raced in that final great day there in the Queen Elizabeth Stakes, she came down to Rosehill, met Chris Waller, met Hugh Bowman, and to see her face light up, and for the moments that that racehorse could take her away from a life of pain and agony was just beautiful, really.
What a lovely way to end. Thank you. Tim, well, you've set the bar high as a professional speaker. You've spoken so well and with such great passion about what needs to be done to start off this IFAR conference. So please thank Tim Gilbert.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, everyone.
Well done, Tim. Consummate performer.